Everyone ready for our next speaker? Do we need to do some jumping jacks? What's going on out there? All right, everybody should be pumped up. Woohoo! All right, yay. All right, yeah. All right, thank you. Next up, and I know you're cheering for me. Next up, we have Daylin Leach, and Daylin's going to be talking to us about the environment.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Anyway, it's good to be with you today, and thank you so much for giving me this chance. I just want to talk a little bit about the environment today, and I chose the environment because of the exigency I see with the environmental situation we have. You know, we can pass bad economic policy, and there's a lot of pain involved, but eventually we can change that and turn it around. That's true of social policy in most cases as well. But with environmental policy, eventually you get to a tipping point where things are never going to come back. Things will never be the same. We lose things that are valuable to us and to our children forever. And we are not acting like that's true. You all know the litany. 2016 was the hottest year in record, beating 2014. 2017 is on pace to beat 2016. We are almost 2 degrees warmer than we were 50 years ago. We could see sea levels rise as much as 6 feet by the end of the century, and we already see flooding in some of our cities. 1 million species are at risk for extinction, and 1/3 of all species on Earth are placed at greater risk for extinction because of acidifying oceans and lack of loss of habitat and all kinds of other things. So we are at a crisis point. And so we need some policies to deal with that. Now, when I first got to Harrisburg, thank you. When I first got to Harrisburg 15 years ago in the State House, I wanted to start addressing these issues. I asked to be on the Environmental Resources and Energy Committee, which I've been on for every day since then. The first thing I got done, the first thing I got enacted in law was bringing hybrid cars to the state fleet. I got the first one as an homage to my efforts. I am trying to do a similar thing with electric cars now that the technology has improved. You know, fixing this issue, reducing climate change and reducing carbon emissions, there's a million steps to this. It's not a magic bullet. So I've tried to introduce things small and large to do that. One of the small things, I actually introduced a bill to give these monitors for electricity to every public library in the state. At the time, there were 704 of them. And so you would check it out like a book, and when you went to buy a refrigerator, you'd plug it in and see how much energy it used. You know, even among the same brands, different models use vastly different amounts of energy for all kinds of appliances, little things like that. But also big things. I've introduced an increase in what's called the Renewable Portfolio Standards legislation. I was part of passing that under Governor Rendell, the first version, and we were one of the first industrial states in the nation to have that, and I was proud of that, but that law is antiquated. Our top, they have something called Tier 1, which is the renewable energy that we require energy companies to produce. It was only 8% now. Some states are as high as 40%. It's time to upgrade. I've introduced legislation to do that. Now, if I go to Congress, I'll have an opportunity to do so much more, because frankly, there's only so much you can do at the state level. And there's a few things that we can do that would make an enormous difference at the federal level. Number one, I support cap and trade. And the beautiful thing about cap and trade is it's a bipartisan idea. Originally, it was a conservative idea. This is the free market fixing environmental problems. For those who don't know, cap and trade says that we're going to establish an amount of carbon we're going to emit into the atmosphere, and we're going to lower it every year, globally. But individual companies would have credits. And so companies that wanted to innovate and wanted to invest more money in cleaning up and getting rid of their emissions would have extra credits they could sell to companies that didn't. And frankly, I don't care, as long as the total amount comes down year by year. Now, this is an idea that can get bipartisan support. Another idea that I strongly support is a carbon tax. Now, you may remember when Sarah Palin, I know you're cheering for Sarah Palin, I get that. You remember when Sarah Palin ran for vice president, they said she was the most popular governor in the country. Do you know why she was the most popular in the country, governor in the country? Because she had an aggressive energy tax, and she took the money and mailed every citizen in Alaska $4,000 every year. It is real easy to be popular when you can mail people $4,000 checks. I know, I've done it, I've seen it firsthand. Give me your address anyway.
Where's my money?
So look, if we enact a carbon tax, which again encourages innovation, encourages free markets, right? If we do that, and we have that extra money, we can use that for all kinds of things. I would prefer to use it for further environmental remediation, for land reclamation, for acid mine drainage cleanup, for all kinds of things we need to do. But look, if we need to get conservative votes, let's just give it to people as a tax cut. That's fine, as long as we're reducing the carbon. Now keep in mind, it's not just carbon. That's a huge part of it, but there are other environmental problems. I'll just touch on two of them real quickly. Number one, I introduced a bill, and I want to fight for this in Congress, to put a tax on those plastic bags that we get at the checkout thing. Now, you should see the names I was called for that. I mean, I had no idea. People were so attached to their plastic bags. I remember when I was a kid growing up during the Hoover administration, we would go to the grocery store, we'd get brown paper bags, and we'd fold them up, right? We all survived. Look at me, I'm alive. Doing good, 94 years old, but you know, I take care of myself. All right, I introduced that tax. You use one of those bags for half an hour for an errand, it stays around for 1,000 years, okay? It's just not worth it. And you know what? I'm not banning them, just put the tax on it. At least that'll reduce it greatly and use that money for more environmental remediation. There's one other thing I want to talk about really quickly on the environment. Then I'll reach my crescendo and reluctantly relinquish the microphone. Which is this. I have always been a huge supporter of animal rights and animal welfare, because how we treat animals not only says a lot about us as a people and as a country and as a state, but it's also hugely important to the environment. We need to strengthen the Endangered Species Act, which is now under attack in Washington, D.C. We need to... And I'm proud of having passed very good cost of care bill, and very good, I have a bill to ban shark fins, and the sale of shark fins in soup, and they're apogee predators, and it destroys, it's a whole thing. But we need to really focus on animal welfare, which we are not doing, especially with the mass species extinction that we're seeing from climate change. We have to work harder to protect those people, and protect the animals. Now, I'll conclude with this. I don't know, did anyone here see the new Al Gore movie, An Inconvenient Sequel, right? A few people saw it, everyone here should see it. It's really good. And what's interesting about it is that the first 2/3 of the movie are very dire. You see all the glaciers melting, and you see all the oceans, the coral reefs are dying because of the acidity of the oceans, and the temperature of the oceans, you know, destroys the coral reef. I mean, it's terrible. You're like, why did I come see this? I can barely tolerate this. But then the last third of the movie is hopeful. The last third of the movie, they actually take the cameras to the Paris Climate Agreement negotiations, right? If you've seen this movie, you know that. They bring you in the room when we're negotiating the Paris Climate Agreement. And you see how hard it was. You see how much resistance we had to overcome, and how truly moving it was when we finally got an agreement that 192 nations signed on to. It wasn't perfect, but we were all moving in the right direction. And by the way, there was no discussion in that 192 nation meeting about this is all bunk, none of this is true. I mean, that was not the debate. It was just about whether wealthy countries or developing countries should shoulder more of the burden. But we came to that agreement. And the movie ends before the real world happened, and Donald Trump just removed us from that agreement. I can't tell you how heartbreaking that is. And we have a moral obligation to ourselves, to our children, to do everything we can to try to remediate this situation. So if I go to Congress, I will fight like I fought in Harrisburg I am sometimes a colorful person. That's my euphemism. But I have always fought, and I've always fought for the tough issues. And I will, I will go to my grave doing that. Hopefully not soon. So thank you so much for listening to me. And let's fight for and let's all read the Lorax too. Thank you.
Thank you, Daylin. Wonderful. So we do have a question for you, no surprise. And you brought up a lot of very important points about the environment, but this particular person would like to know, what would be your list of priorities? Let's say your top 3 things you would do regarding the environment were you to be elected. What do you think are the top 3 things you need to do or that you would be focused on?
Number 1 has to be climate change. Number 1 has to be climate change. What I would like most to do is get a cap and trade system, because the beautiful thing about a cap and trade system is we have a goal, we know where we are, we know how close we're going to get to that goal every year. Sometimes we may exceed that, our timetable. We may do better than we think we will, and I think we would once we unleash innovation. So that's number 1. Number 2, this is also an economic issue. I mean, keep in mind, am I okay?
You're away from that.
Oh, step away? Thank you. Keep in mind, our economic future isn't going to just happen. We have to imagine it, and then we have to invest in it, and we have to nurture it. We should be the leader in the world on research, development, manufacture, distribution, installation, maintenance, of green technology. There are already more people working in the solar industry in Pennsylvania than there are in the coal industry. That is the future. Let us walk towards the future. That is number 2. Number 3, again, I would strengthen the Endangered Species Act. I would work hard on addressing things like making sure that we have an ecosystem and a biodiversity system that is sustainable for life, and not just our life, but for generations to come. I think those are the 3 most important things.
Do we have time for one more? Okay, so one last question, and I'm going to go back to the question we started kind of with Molly on, and that is, what is your plan to promote and be proud of a progressive agenda, like media, and how are you out there kind of with a progressive agenda?
2 things. Number 1, the way you encourage people and build a progressive agenda is that you fight for and live a progressive agenda. You have to show by your example that A, you can do that and it's okay. One of the things, and I've talked about this before, but one of the things that we as Democrats have done in recent years, which I think is a terrible mistake, we've decided that the way to get elected is to be almost ideologically indistinct from our Republican opponents. All these rural voters who came out for Trump in droves, they all used to be Democrats. They voted for LBJ. They voted for FDR. We lost them because we stopped talking about issues in a way that made it clear we were different than our opponents. We've got it. So, for example, if you're for a $15 minimum wage, you know what you do? You say, I am for $15 minimum wage. If you're single payer, I am for single payer, and you defend it. The other thing you need to do, and it's something else we have not been doing, we need, as Woody Allen said, 90% of life is showing up. We need to show up. We can't write off half the population as well. They're not for us, so we're not going to talk to them. I want to go to places I'm never going to win. And I want to try to get these people back, because our policies are better than their policies. And we will make, and if we work at it, we can overcome, Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh, because they're idiots, and we can actually convince them that their lives will be better. And so you show up, you be proudly progressive, even when it's unpopular. It's good to do something unpopular once in a while. It makes people know you're not pandering to them. It makes people know you have a little bit of courage. My staff says, well, Daylin, you don't have to do 100 unpopular things. And I guess there's a point to that. But I am going to continue to do things regardless of whether, that's why I introduced the first marriage equality bill in Pennsylvania history. That's why I introduced the first bill to legalize marijuana in Pennsylvania history. That's why, bill to eliminate the death penalty, a bill to eliminate bail for pretrial detention. $15 an hour is my bill. Mandatory paid family leave is my bill. Mandatory sick leave is my bill. And you know what? If people don't like it, they don't have to vote for me. But we've got to be proud and stop being ashamed of who we are, and that's how we don't. The only time we win elections recently is when the other side screws up so bad that they'd vote for anything, right? Like, we want people to elect us because they're excited about what we're going to do, and they're only going to be excited about what we're going to do if we're excited about what we're going to do. So that's what I hope to do.
All right, thank you, Daylin.